Good afternoon on this rainy day, and welcome to today's webinar, where we will be decoding global career shifts with a focus on how worker preferences have changed following COVID-19, as well as how the pandemic is impacting how candidates perceive retraining and shifting roles in their careers. Some housekeeping before we get started. This webinar is being recorded and attendees will receive the recording along with a link to download our Decoding Global Talent series in an email from GoToWebinar after the session. So today we will share with you some of the key findings from our second and third Global Talent Survey reports. You may remember that the first report looked at mobility and where people want to work, along with increasing appetite for remote working over and above physical relocation for work. The second report looked at the ways in which people would like to work and what really matters to workers in their places of employment. And the final report, which launched this morning, looks into the jobs that have been most affected by the pandemic and how workers feel about retraining and upskilling. We'll outline some of the key changes to how workers actually feel about the jobs that they do and what is truly important to them in the new world of work. We'll also examine what workers really want from their employers, looking at their career needs and how retraining and reskilling will play an important role in the way we think about recruitment and retention in the future. After the presentation, like before, we will be joined by a panel of business leaders to go beyond the findings and hear their thoughts and advice for UK employers. And you'll also have the chance to ask some questions. So my name is Kate. I joined Stepstone and the network team in April 2020. And prior to that, I worked for Totaljobs for 18 years. I was actually an international remote hire and I was onboarded completely remotely this time last year. I'm also a mum to two wonderful young boys who are very happy that I'm not homeschooling them anymore. And when I'm not working, I'm normally running, baking, or watching Line of Duty these days. I'm delighted today to be joined by Nick South from BCG, and I'll hand over to Nick now so that he can introduce himself and tell you a little bit more about BCG.
Hi, hello, thanks Kate. So I'm Nick South. I'm a partner with the Boston Consulting Group, like Kate, been with BCG for 18 years. And I lead our people and organisation practice in the UK. So all the work I do is around operating model, organisation design, people and culture, and a big focus for the last year, not surprisingly, has been around all the trends around the future of work as we come out of the out of the pandemic. So I've got 4 kids, live in Tunbridge Wells, and delighted to be with you today. Boston Consulting Group, it's one of the big international management consultancies, been going since 1963 and working with private companies, public sector organisations on all their sort of complex strategic and organisational challenges.
And you may be wondering who or what is the network. So the network is a global advertising alliance of leading job boards around the world, co-founded by Totaljobs and Stepstone in 2002. The network enables recruiters to reach global candidates through one local solution offering convenience, coverage, a single point of contact, and one invoice in one currency. We have 60 partners across 140 countries, and our mission is to provide a go-to and unique solution to enhance the businesses of international recruiters. Totaljobs have been a network partner since 2002 and have been helping UK companies recruit internationally now for almost 20 years. That's hard to believe. And this is the third time that they have participated in the GTS. And we first started working with BCG in 2014, and this is the third report that we have published together. And we're absolutely thrilled and honoured to be working with the BCG team again. They're amazing. And this is a really valuable collaboration for us, and the feedback has been fantastic. So really pleased to be back with you again to share some of the findings from reports 2 and 3 alongside Nick. So let's kick off with a look at the current recruitment trends that we're actually seeing in the marketplace. So if we rewind back and we met on 4th of March, I talked about the fact that more than half of UK employers were planning on recruiting within the following 3 months, with the strongest needs in healthcare, finance, insurance, education and IT. And this certainly seems to be the case. The first 3 months of 2021 saw notable positives for the recruitment landscape, with 26% of businesses increasing their hiring. In particular, media, marketing, advertising, PR and sales, health and medical services, and IT and telecoms increased their hiring above the average seen across the wider market. This data actually comes from the Totaljobs Hiring Trends Index, which is a quarterly deep dive into the trends that are shaping businesses now and in the months and years to come. The inaugural research launched on the 19th of April and looked back at the first quarter of 2021 from mid-December to mid-March. The research also shows that a quarter of businesses have more certainty around business planning following the government announcing their COVID-19 roadmap, and that over half of HR decision makers are confident they'll successfully fill their vacancies in Q2. Additionally, 24% of businesses plan on increasing recruitment in Q2. Meanwhile, ONS stats from the 20th of April show that the latest unemployment rate is 4.9% from December to February, which is slightly down on the previous quarter of 5.1%, which we discussed back when we met in March. So it certainly looks like a more positive picture in the UK compared to where we were when we last met, and also where we were in Q1. So now I'm going to pass the mic back to Nick, who's going to talk you through the report and some of the findings.
Thanks, Kate. So look, clearly over the last year, we've all experienced a massive global health crisis. That's led in turn to a huge economic crisis with significant social and human consequences. And all of this, of course, against the backdrop, if you like, of a much greater appreciation of the broader climate crisis that we're facing as human beings. Not surprisingly, it's had a massive impact on how we all see the world we live in, how we think about work, how we think about the future. And that was really the backdrop to the survey, which we ran in October. And today we want to focus on reports 2 and 3, which are following on from our last session where we focused on that first report and attitudes to mobility. If we think about the sort of base for this, I mean, it is actually a remarkable study, and it isn't really anything else out there like it. Because of the reach that the network has, we're able to tap into a huge number of different markets. So we've had responses from 209,000 people. It was launched in October in 25 languages, and we had respondents from 190 countries across the world. If we then just skip on to the next slide, just to give you a flavour of those sort of 209,000 people, as you can see, a pretty even split between men and women, largely concentrated among people between 20 and 40, more of a skew to people who are junior staff and lower management, but around three quarters of people with degree level education or equivalent. So that gives you a flavour of the sort of demographics. Let's move on to the next slide and start by looking at the impact of COVID-19 on working practices. And I think this picture reflects, we've done sort of lots of other research in lots of different countries, and this kind of reflects the picture we see in lots of different research. And before the pandemic, 68%, so 2/3 of those 210,000 people were working completely on site. During the pandemic, the numbers of those who are either working completely remotely or in a mix of remote and on-site increased significantly to over 50%. And crucially, that experience over the last 12 months and more has radically changed people's perceptions of how they want to work in the future. So if you look on the right-hand side of this graph, only 13% of those people want to work in a completely on-site way in the future. 60% want to work in some sort of more hybrid model, and that reflects, research we've done in other places where we typically find around 2/3 of people are looking for some form of hybrid work in the future, and their expectation is that their employers will be sort of trying to help them achieve that goal. So that's for everyone who employs people. How do you manage this becomes a big question. Now, what's been the impact of this whole experience on UK employees? Now, clearly there's been positives and there's been negatives. One of the big positives, and this is what people tell us in the responses to the survey, is the experience of using digital tools. So every organisation found that to make this work, we had to have a massive step change in the tools that people could use, and people's experience of that has been by and large positive. Where there have been negative impacts, it's been around work-life balance, their perceptions of the quality of leadership, in general well-being, and to some extent on productivity. Though I want to give you a bit more data on that in a moment. I think what's really interesting in the research that we've done around this, the biggest sort of challenge that people have found, the biggest negative impact has been this blurring of boundaries between home life and work life. So as we look forward to sort of more hybrid ways of working, helping people to manage that point about boundaries is clearly going to be a key thing. If we just go to the next slide, this is from other research that we've done. This was based on research with 2,000 UK employees who we conducted at the end of August last year, where we really tried to explore how working remotely had impacted people's perceptions of their ability to be productive. And what this showed was some quite interesting things. People felt that certainly for things like individual tasks and managerial tasks, they could be as productive or more at home as they could be in the workplace. And the top 3 tasks where they said, look, I can be really, really productive at home or as productive as in the office or the workplace is thinking time, admin tasks, and meeting deadlines. However, when it came to more collaborative working, people said, look, that's actually a bit more challenging remotely. And yes, I can be productive, but to be honest, the place where I'm most productive on those things is in the workplace. And the top 3 tasks where people say, look, I'm most productive in the workplace, meeting customers, working collaboratively with colleagues, getting information from others. So when you sort of think about productivity in a sort of more the average way, you see this picture. Now, interestingly enough, that was August last year. Anecdotally, the sense I've got talking to people in lots of different organizations is as every month has gone by, people have found the sort of productivity thing, particularly on the collaborative working, an increasing challenge. And particularly for people who joined the organizations over the last year, have had no face-to-face contact of others, the impact on the apprenticeship you get by learning and working side by side with people, that suffered, and just that sort of connectivity that leads to great sort of joint problem solving, that's become more difficult. So I think as people think forward and think, what sort of model do I want? One of the attractions of the more hybrid models, if you can get it to work, is the way of kind of making sure you've got the capacity to get people together for the things you need to. If we just go on to the next slide, and this is where we started to look at people's preferences for the future. And as we've already said, lots of people want more flexibility in where they work. And 60%, as I've already said, say, look, I want to split my time between on-site and home working. I want a model that enables me to do that. Interestingly enough, and this again reflects research we've done in other places, 2/3 of people are also saying, I want more flexibility also, not just in where I work, but in when I work. So you're really seeing this thing saying, look, I want a model here which enables me to have a bit more flex in where I am, but also to be a bit more choiceful about when I do the work. And interestingly enough, if you go to the next slide, that piece about flexibility and when I work, particularly important for women on the left-hand side. And interestingly enough, women are probably a bit less keen on the completely remote models than some men are. And in reality, I think where most organizations will end up is you'll have a lot less people working completely remote, you'll have a lot more of the hybrid working. If we just go on to the next piece, and this is one of the things we've asked every year we've done this, 2014, 2018, again last year, is look, what matters to you in a job? And here you see some very consistent messages. So if you take those top 3 things, those are pretty consistent with what we saw 2 years ago. Good relationships with my colleagues, good relationships with my line manager, and a reasonable work-life balance. And for people, that kind of mix of things becomes very, very important. In the UK, on the right-hand side, the next 2 things are also hugely important. I want interesting job content and an appreciation of the work I do. So when you're really thinking about what is it that's going to help me retain someone, that sense of being appreciated and recognized for doing a job that is meaningful and has impact, hugely important, along with those top 3 things. Interestingly enough, on the left-hand side, for global workers, financial compensation was up there in number 4th place. It wasn't actually in the list of the top 10 for the UK workers. Not that it doesn't matter, but I think for a lot of UK workers, it's kind of, I want to know that's obviously there. I want to know that I'm being rewarded for what I do. But fundamentally, when it comes to will I stay with this job, it's a lot of these things in those top 5 things, along with 6 and 7, job security, stability of employer. Those things are obviously in the mix as well. Okay, last slide, and I'll hand back to Kate. This, I think, is a really, really important slide because it's sort of the survey, for the first time we asked questions around this, and it provides real evidence of just how important values are becoming for people in their decision making around job opportunities and careers. So what we found here is that 69% of the global workforce believe that diversity and inclusion has become more important in 2020. I think it's around 60% in Britain. 70% of the global workforce believe environmental issues are more important in the last year, 61% in Britain. And then when you look at the stats on this page, 41% of UK workers wouldn't apply for a job where they believe the policies don't align with their D&I values. That's 50% globally. 38% of UK workers wouldn't apply for a job where a company didn't match their environmental values. 50% globally. So you get a real sense now that being able to have a very clear view of what your D&I positions are, what your environmental positions are, being able to communicate those to people through a recruiting process, but then crucially living that promise and people being able to see that promise being lived when they join a company and they're with a company, becoming hugely important for workers in today's environment. So I think it's a very, very important finding coming out of this year's report. Kate, over to you.
Thanks, Nick. So as we know all too well, COVID-19 has led to a huge amount of changes in our working lives, many positive and some negative, as Nick's just highlighted for you. So when candidates think about the future, how open are they to change after a year that has been defined by it? And the answer is that workers are open to change. And it looks like we have definitely become way more accepting and open to change globally, given the year that we've just had. In the global results, the survey found that 68% of workers say they're open to retraining. A further 28% of workers would retrain if necessary, and only 4% aren't willing to retrain at all. This is compared to 57% of UK workers open to retraining, as you can see on the slide. Younger workers and those in the middle of their career are more willing to retrain, with the youngest workers and people nearing retirement and people with more formal education the least willing. So given that the youngest workers and those less educated have been hardest hit by the pandemic in terms of job losses, I guess it's no surprise that they're more willing to retrain. And it's great to see that the vast majority would consider retraining on its own merit, as opposed to this being only a consideration if they feel they're insecure in their work. So generally now people are more open to change and more willing to go where the opportunity is and then take the steps needed to get there, whether that includes reskilling, upskilling, or industry hopping. And what sectors are most likely to retrain and what sectors are most desirable for people to move into? So the data shows us that it's services, manual and customer service workers who are particularly keen to retrain, which potentially is where vulnerability to automation or the impact of COVID-19 does come into play. And then of those willing to retrain, they would aim to move into digital or IT roles, as well as office and management jobs, such as consulting, marketing and HR. Generally, a career change wouldn't be too far from the industry a person's already in. So for example, somebody moving from healthcare into social care or marketing into sales. And then what does this actually mean for businesses? So it shows us that workers have an appetite to learn in some sectors more than others. And if employers are willing to train and upskill their staff, then it will potentially allow them to attract more talent because of the development opportunities that they offer. And it also gives employers a more skill-enriched workforce, where, for example, you could build up in-house expertise as well as hiring it in. This itself leads to more variety within role and therefore improved retention rates. You could, for example, consider offering a retraining package as part of a job offer in the same way that you'd offer a relocation package. And how important is learning and how do UK workers prefer to learn? Well, we certainly have been focused on self-development in recent months. I've witnessed this firsthand, and this has been one of the real positives of the pandemic. Over half of UK workers spend at least a few weeks learning every year. Only 8% don't dedicate any time to this. The higher the level of education in the UK, the less time spent on learning. With 21 to 30-year-olds spending the most time learning, followed by 31 to 40-year-olds. And the top kind of three preferred ways of learning haven't changed since 2018, being on-the-job training, self-study, and then online courses. So looking to the future, what things should be considered now in order to attract and retain the best talent? So thinking of recruitment, make strategic workplace planning more dynamic. This ultimately means having practices in place to anticipate current and future hiring needs. This then ensures that your organization has the resources that it needs to achieve its goals. This can be quite a daunting process for some businesses. And a good place to start is analysing your current workforce to identify gaps and opportunities for future success. Consider candidates with different career paths, re-examine those typical role requirements, accept gaps in employment over the last year. With over a third of workers laid off globally, I think this is really key. It's really important. And then, experiment and monitor with new working models, and bear in mind that this will most likely differ by role, and it's important that your people should play a role in what that looks like. Embed learning and development into your employee value proposition, and set up incentives and infrastructure that supports learning and adaptability. Promote this in your adverts, as it will resonate with the talent that you're seeking to bring in. And empower people to learn. A learning strategy should be based in process and structure, but at the same time offer the opportunity for people to carve their own career path within this, and allow them to take responsibility for their upskilling and reskilling. And flexibility, as Nick mentioned, that's really, really important. Upskill at scale. Build large-scale upskilling programs where you can assess and track proficiency in different areas, alongside a learning journey approach that's customizable for different people within your business. This is actually something I've been heavily involved with recently in our business, and I'm happy to discuss with anyone who would like to reach out to me afterwards. I'm always happy to share, because there's some good kind of best practice to share from that. So just like the last time, there's a lot of really kind of key, interesting takeaways. But here's a reminder of kind of some of the top points we've covered. With so many workers in the UK willing to retrain, 57% in any case, and a further third if necessary, there's a real opportunity for employers to position retraining and reskilling or upskilling both their current staff and potential hires to aid professional development and internal career moves. For candidates looking for their next role, more will be looking outside of their current industry, utilising their transferable skills as a strength, alongside the new perspectives they've gleaned from outside the industry. With this, candidates will absolutely expect flexibility built into their role. 87% of UK workers are looking for this, regardless of their remit. We're seeing a real shift to reclaiming work-life balance, and people taking a firmer stance when it comes to making distinctions between work and home life. After seeing these lines blur so much throughout the pandemic, we've all experienced that. And I think this is a really important point. I'm hearing reports from outside about markets outside of the UK where vacancies have surged, but demand for jobs has really declined. Perhaps this is due to the fact that there's still some COVID insecurity and workers are unsure about returning to the workforce. But I think also there's so much competition now that job seekers have so many jobs to choose from that many will lean towards the roles that perhaps offer more flexibility. As an aside on this, I heard this morning about a great flexible benefit that one company is offering, where you can work outside of your home country of employment for up to 90 days a year, which is great. Really, really, really great incentive for staff. So ultimately, businesses can utilize these trends and this data to better understand and connect with candidates and potentially hire from a broader and more diverse talent pool. So now I would like to invite our panel of experts on to answer your questions. So please do submit your questions. Take this opportunity to ask us whatever you wish. This is the last in the 3 reports. So please do submit your questions today if you have any. Welcome, John, and welcome, Frank. How are you?
Good, Kate.
Good, thank you.
Haven't been described as an expert before, so I'm going to take that.
Likewise,
Take it home with it.
I'd take the same view. I'd take that as a compliment I don't always get. So great, thank you.
Wonderful. So we have the first question, which is great. Keep them coming. So how has the pandemic impacted demand for certain skills, and can we expect this to change during the COVID recovery? And I will direct that to John. I'll put that to you first.
Well, I think, Kate, you hit on a couple of points through your presentation. So Totaljobs recently completed the hiring trends index. And there's 2 or 3 things I'd say that are really interesting in there. When we look at last year, and we were in the midst of the worst parts of the pandemic, like what was happening, and online retail, logistics, nursing, care roles, etc. These things exploded, and there just weren't enough people out there to fill those vacancies, but everything else closed down. Now, you referenced then in Q1 where we see jobs like PR, marketing, IT, having a resurgence, and you can kind of see that element of like office work versus kind of practical work, if you like, when you think about deliveries, etc. So we see that increase now, which is obviously an indication of that confidence growing. So I think you mentioned a little while ago that job postings are going up, but maybe the demand isn't quite as high as we would expect. And I think there is that element that companies understand that as they come out of a downturn, that moving quickly is really, really important. So I think they're gearing up for that. And obviously candidates are super careful, which you can understand after the year we just had. What we do see though going into Q2 is that 26% of businesses in the UK are planning to increase their hiring, and particularly the government's roadmap is really, really helping with that. So retail, hospitality, those businesses that were desperately affected by the lockdowns, showing the most confidence and the most active in the market and most likely to increase hiring. So we're probably just seeing some pent-up demand come through from kind of the UK economy, and I would very much expect that the candidate side of this marketplace to be following pretty close behind.
Great, thanks, John. You guys anything to add on that?
Kate, sorry, I think from our perspective, I guess in Staffline we've got quite a unique view of the recruitment or the employment marketplace on the basis that we do an awful lot of our work in the sort of the blue collar sector, the temporary worker sector. So as John mentioned, we saw this absolute explosion in retail, and particularly online retail. So working with the big supermarkets, the demand for online supermarket shopping, as we all know, went through the roof. And that in itself as a process involves many more people. So whereas we would just go to the shop and fill out a basket, this is now taking someone in a warehouse to pack and pick. It's taking a driver to come out to your home. So it increases the cost, and that increases the volume of people. And we had EasyJet pilots driving vans delivering Ocado deliveries, etc., etc. And we saw that happen. I guess thinking about what happens post-pandemic, and John mentioned it, is these people will go back to their core roles. So pilots will fly again. People will move back into an opened up hospitality sector, and then suddenly we've got this this pocket, if you like, of demand. And there are certain skills. I mean, we mentioned driving, for example. We know there's a chronic shortage of HGV drivers, for example, and the average age, I think, of an HGV driver in our business is 58, and we're not necessarily seeing the younger generation come through. So for us, it's about taking people into the world of a career in driving, but actually moving them on from where they might be driving a class 2 driver, so driving a sort of a minibus or a van, etc., and then training them to become the HGV drivers of the future, because the HGV lorry driving business has never been busier as a result of the pandemic.
Yeah, I think it's a really great point, Frank, that there are people that would never have signed up to get their shopping online, and then they had to in that first lockdown. And it used to be that the supermarkets would pay you like 40 quid to do your first shop online. Well, they managed to sign up the entire country without having to have that marketing expense. So like that isn't going away. And you're absolutely right. As people go back to their core role, if it's flying an EasyJet or whatever the job is there still demand in those areas? So like logistics is one of those things that traditionally Q1 you see quite a drop off after the Christmas rush. Didn't really see that this year. It's slightly, but not anything like you would have expected. So that's going to be consistent. And you know, we talk about skills gaps, unemployment, retraining, etc. Is those sectors that benefited from the pandemic last year, they're going to experience shortages ongoing, and there are obviously opportunities then for people who are looking to change or start their careers.
Just one other thing to add, I think the other thing that's been interesting is at a leadership level. I think the early days of the lockdowns really emphasised the importance and value of sort of empathetic leadership, leaders who could connect, engage, sort of understand the experience of the people going through and sort of connect with that. And I think that is a lasting change, because as we move into a world where you can have more hybrid models of work, you're going to have to get teams connecting in different ways. I think at the leadership level, there's going to be a premium on leaders who can lead in that way and connect, bring authenticity, empathise with their people and so on. So I think that's going to be quite an interesting shift at a leadership level.
Really interesting point.
I think so, particularly when you think of the different outlook that younger workers have, and then as you go through the age groups, how that changes. And clearly, the future workforces of all of our businesses, these people are coming into the job market today. And there is an expectation that you do align with, we talk about environmental or social or DE+I objectives, and really just about that core belief that treating people fairly and treating people well and trying to make things better is a fundamental part of what you do, as well as whatever it happens to be that you are making or that you're selling or the service that you're providing. Clearly, that's what you're paid for. But you know, we talk about this idea of bringing your whole self to work, and part of you is an employee in a business, but another part of you is, you know, an individual that has concerns about the world that they live in. And I think bringing some of that into the workplace is, one, it's the right thing to do, but also we'll see our employees demand more of that over time rather than less, for sure.
I think that's one of the real positives that I've seen in the last year, is that I think through the way we connect now, because we're all, you know, we're all speaking to each other from our homes. You really see the human side of somebody, because you see the kids, the dog in the background, you know, so, you know, the humanity of it, I think, has been really important, because you don't just see the work colleague, you see the mum, the dad, the daughter, you know. So I think that's been really great. And I think it's a really interesting point that you raised, Frank, about people going back to their core role. And this is something I was talking to somebody about this week, is that do you think there'll be certain sectors? Because I was just wondering, like somebody in hospitality, for example, who have had just the most dreadful year, thinking about kind of going back to work now, because the vacancies I've seen like the vacancies surge now in the past few months for hospitality. Do you think there'll be a real kind of reluctance to think, well, if I go back, I could be at risk again if there's a third wave? Like, do you reckon there's a bit of still uncertainty about that?
Yeah, we would definitely see that. I think the security piece is something that for me has really come out of this pandemic, is that you know, actually, you know, they used to talk in the olden days about job for life, etc. And I think, you know, there's a certain age group of us that have gone, that's not necessarily the case anymore. But actually, I think there is a level of importance where, you know, a candidate wants to work for a business where they feel there is some level of security. And I think, you know, where we as a business, you know, Nick mentioned the point about leadership, is that we've always been very open. I was lucky enough to join the business just before the pandemic hit, so brand new into the industry, brand new into the business. So I was kind of learning as we went through the pandemic. So I was very open with our people about what we were going through. And my commitment is, you know, the mistakes that we maybe made early days, we're not going to make again. So we've learned from those. We will make sure as a business we're so much better prepared for anything that could come our way in the future. And I think many businesses will do that. And then I think it's important to talk about that. And if you tell candidates that that's what you know, these are the mistakes we made, this is what we did, this is what we've learned, and this is how we'll be different going forward, it gives people an idea of security. Because you're absolutely right, Case. I think there is a nervousness about I go back into the world of hospitality. What if the next wave comes? What's the next pandemic? What's the next crisis? And it's completely understandable. So yeah, I can definitely see that portion of those people looking to reskill and retrain.
I think there'll also be an element as well of candidates going in and perhaps asking at interview stage, you know, how did you handle the pandemic? What did you do? How did you treat your staff? Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point. I can see we've had another question pop up now. So it's, are UK companies willing to hire and retrain? Nick, shall I start with you this time?
Yeah, I think they absolutely are. I mean, it'd be interesting to see what John and Frank say, but the reality is every organisation I work with, when they think about what they're trying to achieve and they think about the capabilities they need to get there, have a real consciousness about there's a set of skills they need for the future, some of which they've got, some of which they don't have, other skills they've got too much of and they're going to need less of in the future. And while they absolutely are saying, well, there's skills I need to go out into the market and I need to hire for, there's areas where I've got people with legacy skills, if you like, but they could be doing those jobs in the future that I need over there. And I've got a responsibility to them to help prepare them for the future, whether they stay with our organisation or leave. But I can see what a kind of reskilling pathway could look like, which helps to migrate people into different roles. And I'm seeing much more openness from organizations rooted in a kind of good strategic workforce planning sort of mindset to say, okay, where are the needs of the future? How do I help people migrate towards those? And I think most organizations are thinking quite hard about this.
I might have a slightly different view. So Frank, why don't you jump in there before I put my 2 pence in?
Okay. I guess in answer to the question, Kate, yes, UK businesses clearly are more than willing to invest in reskilling and retraining of people. I think my take on this, and particularly in what I try to do with our business, is actually really get people signed up to their own development plan. So, you know, work on that commitment about where it is you want to be, you know, in your future state, and think really wide about it, because I want people to be really rounded in their skills. I am more than happy to recruit a finance person with a view that actually I can see their skill set moving into the world of maybe commercial, maybe even to sales to some description. And actually that's a career path that they come in and they don't think of. They think I've got to follow the traditional finance route and I'm going to be, you know, the future FD CFO. We've got examples of that, which, you know, for me, it's always about, let's see where your career can take you, and then let's support you, reskill you, retrain you to do that. And you get then you get the best, most rounded individuals of the future. So you've got to have that really wide open view as to where people can go with their careers, I think.
Yeah, I think from a personal point, I 100% agree with you there, Frank, and actually with you as well, Nick. I guess where my country opinion goes is we did some work recently with the Work Foundation, looking at the government's lifetime skills guarantee and this idea of creating training for those that maybe didn't leave school with the right qualifications, etc. We talk a lot about this kind of skills gap that's opening up in the UK economy. And really some of the interesting findings that we had in that report is 70% of the training that happens today for people in work is how I do my job better. So they're basically training for the role they have now only to do it better. When we know that actually 80% of the people who are in work today, they will 80% of the population who will be in work in 2030, they're in work today. So we know there's a ton of different roles and different skills that are required by companies. Companies are seeking people with different skills to what they have within their own organization, but you've got issues around budgets, etc. that COVID has impacted, has put companies backwards. It's hard to invest when actually what you're trying to do is keep the lights on, you know, and you're trying to make sure that you have a business for your employees. And so I think companies want to retrain and they're capable of doing it. But I think also the government needs to step in. So we did some lobbying back at that time because the courses that they're offering are actually really good, but there's so many restrictions that half the people that would benefit don't qualify. So I think there really is something incumbent upon the government to actually support companies to develop people to do the jobs of the future, as well as just training them to be better at the jobs that they're in today. So I think like the answer is yes, but I think the UK economy does need more support centrally, either financially or with some of the schemes that the government are running.
Definitely. I think as well that plays a really important role in kind of younger education. So, you know, the government working hand in hand with schools to educate teachers and, you know, younger, you know, people in terms of, you know, these are the roles you should be, this is what you should be thinking about when you go to university. This is where the opportunities will be in the future. I remember that was something that, you know, back when I worked at Totaljobs, we worked with a government body around, you know, educating schools on, you know, the shortages in construction and how there's so much opportunity in that field, and that's where you should go into. But I think government plays a really important role.
Yeah,
I think it's important to take advantage of what is out there as well. John's absolutely right. There's clearly more that government can do, but there's, you know, whether it's apprenticeship programs or you know, the Kickstart scheme, for example, you know, a fantastic opportunity to take on, you know, brand new workers that have come straight out of education and actually get their salaries part funded by the government and get them through a training program and bring them into, you know, brand new roles. So we thought long and hard. I mean, again, like many companies, we had a tough pandemic, so, you know, money isn't flying around everywhere, so you need to spend sensibly but actually make the most of what's out there. So we've taken the opportunity to take, you know, some of these new starters on, get them trained up into brand new roles for us, and hope their careers will flourish. So but I think it's right, there's loads more that can be done.
Yeah, that's really cool. Interestingly, what seems to be happening out there is the number of companies who've taken up the Kickstarter scheme is really significant. I can't remember the exact numbers, but you know, it's high tens of thousands. But the number of apprentices who have actually started is really small, 5,000 or something like that. And I wonder if companies are still hedging their bets a little bit and starting people later in the year rather than now, which obviously this is the period when you want to be filling those jobs. So I think, Frank, you guys at Staffline have got exactly the right ideas. Take advantage of these schemes. None of them are simple or easy to get your hands on, but actually there are some great opportunities out there for companies that do want to invest in their people and take that step. You know, I've been through some of the courses that are available, and it's surprising the opportunities that are out there for people.
Well, that leads us really nicely into our next question. So learning styles are very different. Learning styles are very important. Different people learn in different ways. From your experiences, what kind of best practice approaches have you seen to help accommodate this? And how can businesses create an effective learning and development strategy while many are focused on getting back on track? Really good question. Who wants to take that first?
I mean, I can give you.
Go, Frank. I can see your desperate answer.
Yeah, carry on, Frank.
I'm not sure I am desperate, but I've got a good example. And this isn't an advert for them, but one of the things that we introduced quite early in 2020, actually, it was part of the roadmap, but I think, you know, a number of us championed it. Was we introduced this learning platform via Thrive. And effectively, it's this sort of, it's really nice sort of, we call it Netflix style learning. So, you know, as any sort of employee, you can log on and it recommends stuff to you that's personal specific, but also job specific. You put in your preferences. And these are bite-sized training courses. There's some really, you know, let's be honest, dull compliance required courses, but they're, you know, they're engaging. The gamification process of making sure that your scores get logged down and you know, chat to your mates on a social feed as to how you've done it. You know, the interaction that we've got with that is incredible. I never ever thought that we would see the level of engagement that we have, and it's been mind-blowing. And you know, there's a constant feed of learning. If I brought our population through standard classroom-based training programs last year, I wouldn't have scratched the surface with what I think we've already managed to get into people's, you know, development programs. And it's not the finished article, but yeah, it's just, for me, that's something that's actually relatively inexpensive in the scheme of things on a per head basis. It's a bit self-serve, but it's so easy and so engaging that it's really worked for us. So that's something that feels novel, certainly to us as a business.
What was the name of that platform, Frank?
So it's Thrive. So the company is called Thrive. And interestingly, there's a number of companies that use it. I mean, I was previously employed by, let's say, a major satellite entertainment company who also used the same platform.
Right.
But actually, I think even though they were famed for their engagement with their people, actually, I think we might sit top of the tree now in terms of the number of people that are engaged as a percentage of the working population. And really, for a relatively, or for a big recruitment business, we're nowhere near that scale. That's really been amazing. And I think many companies could benefit from that type of thing.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. There's an element of flexibility that is critical because people don't all learn the same way. Obviously, we know this, and they don't always have the same time and headspace available at fixed dates. It's a bit like, traditional TV is gone because not everybody sits down at 6 o'clock to watch Coronation Street or whatever. And I think one of the things I'd say in addition to that flexibility is actually spending real time working on what are the key skills that your business needs to be successful, right? Training should deliver a return on investment. And I think sometimes training for training's sake can seem like a cost in your P&L that you might need to trim. But actually, if you spend that time understanding what is critical to our strategy this year, what are the skills that our team need to be able to deliver against that strategy, and let's invest in that. I think if you're critical that way in terms of like how you spend your money, then you can see the returns, which obviously creates the type of flywheel that you want, that creates more money to invest further into your people, because again, it's driving your strategy forward. So I think it's really worthwhile spending that time so that you're clear what are the gaps within your organization, and that's what you're going to fill, and that's why you're filling it, and that's a benefit that it has. I think that's, if I think strategically, that's something that I would encourage companies to spend some time on.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add is that there's also the case that the best learning, the most important learning that we all get in our jobs is on the job, and it's sitting side by side with someone, observing how they do things, being coached, etc. And so I think there's a massive thing as we come back from this and back into the workforce, where you've got, particularly for all those people who've had no face-to-face contact for a year and none of that apprenticeship, and just kind of how we help line managers to recognize that the importance of that, and to sort of support them in providing the support and the challenge and the coaching that will help people learn and develop on the job. So I think that will be one of the biggest challenges in the months ahead, in terms of kickstarting learning and training again. Will just be the role of the frontline manager in supporting people in that on-the-job learning.
I think you're right. And from your presentation, you talked about, well, what is the most important things people look for when they're starting a job, and that connection with colleagues, because that ability to learn because you're sitting next to someone that is critical. Clearly, none of us have been doing that for the past year. And Totaljobs, we have a brand called Milkground, which specializes in graduate recruitment. And we recently did some surveys of graduates into their first jobs and people who onboarded remotely. And actually, that's the bit that they're missing. But also, 55% of them are saying actually they're lonely at work. And so clearly, not only are you not getting connection with your colleagues, but none of that learning is happening. And it may not even be official training, but sitting down next to a colleague that's been in the business for a couple of years, it's a massive amount of training in and of itself. And I think there's a huge gap. So you're right, Nick, that when we do come back, you may have someone like Kate, who started a year ago. Kate obviously doesn't need the support. She's been there, done it, bought the t-shirt. But some of those newer members of your team, you might think of, oh, well, this person's been in the business for 9 months, but actually it's a whole load of benefit that they have not had from working at home. So I think paying attention to that once we get back to our offices and slightly more normal environment it's a good call.
Great, thanks, John. I had a really good question here, which I'm going to direct to you, John, because I know you've done a huge amount of great work on this recently. Is how can businesses embed their corporate social responsibility in terms of DE&I into their employer value proposition?
You know, what I'd say with all of this is, if you want candidates or current employees to look at your business and go, oh, I really like what they're doing, then you just have to be good at it, right? So it's like, there are no shortcuts. There's no way to do it other than to do it, and do it because you want to. So in our organization, we knew that the diversity, equity, and inclusion topic was something that touched the lives of a lot of our staff, inside work, outside of work, and connecting with people to understand, actually, how do we improve Totaljobs as an employer, not only for the people who work for us today, but those who might want to come and work for us in the future. And so it's really supporting our employee resource groups to start up, giving them the space, the ability to really drive their own agenda. But then also we created a management task force that says, well, look, we've got our employee resource groups, which are about education, about celebration of diverse issues within our organization, but actually, how do we then drive meaningful change? How do we change the rules, the processes, the policies within the company? And so we have a group of managers from all across the business who then, it's their job to basically hear what's happening and actually then, you know, take up the mantle of making change within the organization. I'm really pleased to say that there's a ton of work happening. There's so much more to do. But you know, when anybody walks into the organization, or when I interview people and they talk about, you know, what is the culture like, what are you working on, that diversity, equity, and inclusion comes up quite a lot. And being able not only to say nice things, but to actually say, this is what we believe, this is what we're doing, here's how our staff contribute, is really, really valuable. And anybody that comes into the business, and hopefully they want to be part of that too, and help us make our place of work the place that people want to come to work. And of course, as a business that provides one of the doorways for employment, I think it's critical that kind of we understand these issues, that we care about them, that we walk the walk, you know. So if we publish some information about, you know, different strategies that companies can use, then, like, you know, what are we doing ourselves? And so I think it's important to people because it's important. And if you want to be seen as an employer that is strong in this space, then you just got to do the work. I'd say there are no shortcuts.
Yeah, and something Frank said earlier, which I 100% agree with, is honesty matters. You know, so it's, look, this is why this matters to us. This is what we're trying to do. This is where we want to get to. But this is where we are, and we're not doing so bad over here. But we're not anywhere where we need to be over there. But this is what we're trying to do to change it. And I think people just don't want to hear the sort of the stories. They want to know frankness, candor, honesty. This is what we're not where we need to be, but this is what we're doing. I think that becomes important in that as well.
It's so important in our business, as Nick rightly said. It's something that we've just introduced that to the business since the new management team's been in. Is we've changed our vision and purpose. So, you know, people do want to work for a business that's got the right purpose, that's focused on the right things. You know, we've moved away from talk about making customers more successful or making more money. It's about, you know, our purpose is now to find people good work. We have a role to play post-pandemic to actually be a better business. And, you know, as one of the biggest, you know, recruiters in the UK, we have a responsibility to sort of lead from the front on this stuff. So, you know, in terms of diversity and inclusion, etc., it's become fundamentally part of what we're about, our DNA as a business. And exactly as John says, it starts at the top. You got to walk the walk. And I've had the conversations with my employees saying, we're not where we need to be in terms of, you know, a gender balance in our business, in our senior management team, or down the levels. You know, we might be at certain levels of our business, but not at the top table. So what do we need to do about that? Well, we can't have a shortlist for any job unless it's, you know, diverse and balanced. You know, we can't possibly do that. So we need to address it. We need to make sure that, you know, no one gets interviewed by a panel that's not diverse. You know, everybody has to be interviewed by a diverse bunch of people to make sure that we're finding the best candidate, giving the best candidate the job. And the best candidate will always get the job, but sometimes you have to force some of these issues. So, you know, we've made some pretty bold changes that actually, you know, in the stereotypical view of the recruitment world, maybe haven't been there before, but, you know, you've got that responsibility. You've got to lead from the front.
So we're running out of time, so we've got 5 minutes left. So we've got time for one more question. So as we reflect on the findings of the Global Talent Survey, what are the main lessons you believe employers can apply to effectively redesign the future of work? Nick, do you want to start off?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and unfortunately we haven't got long, and I've got about a minute. So I think the first thing is really break down your teams and your roles and what do they need, how do they need to work to meet your customers' needs? Therefore, what sort of working models are possible? Second, talk to people. What do they want? How do people want to work? How then can we try and balance that with what we need to do in the work we're doing? Thirdly, think about some of the principles and guardrails, if you like, that kind of we have to apply across the board, because you know, this needs to be equitable, it needs to be fair, we're going to have different models. Fourthly, then I think there's a really, really important thing, which is to say, we're going to try some things. You know, we won't get it right first time, but let's try this for a couple of months, see how we're getting on. We might just tweak it, we might just stop things, we might have to do some new things, but give yourself the license to adjust and adapt as you learn. I think that's hugely important. And then lastly, be really, really clear in the comms. You know, this is what we're doing. This is what we're doing. Why? We've heard you. We're trying to do this. But remember, we're also trying to be a business that meets these needs, etc., etc. So I mean, there's a whole package of things you need to do together.
Thanks, Nick. John, Frank, anything to add to that?
The only thing I'd say, I echo what you said, Nick. I would say just don't bury your head in the sand. Is you might think, oh, my business runs better if I've got everybody in one place. But I guarantee you, companies, they may not be in your industry, but they are competing for your staff, and they're competing for talent in the future. Is, you know, people will be offering more flexible solutions, and if you're not there, it is going to hurt your business. And when you ask that question, is what is the optimal way of working where I retain staff, I can attract new staff, and I also have strong productivity? Because of course we do need that too, but 100% one way or the other way is probably not the right way to go. And I think answering that question for you, that allows some more flexibility for your staff, is an essential component of how we need to operate in the future, I'd say.
Right, thank you, John.
Okay, sorry, just for me, I think the key for me is measure people's outputs, not their inputs, and I think that's a real key message that everyone can take. And you know, don't add to the current sort of fragile mental health state of many of us by adding a demand of where you require people to be in the office. You know, I've heard people say people will be in the office, you know, Tuesday to Thursday, and the other days will be flexible. Give people the choice. Don't add the weight of demand. And finally, I think flexible working ticks all the boxes. It lowers costs for businesses. It is much more environmentally friendly to have proper flexible working, and it gives the work-life balance that people clearly want, as the survey tells us they still want. So yeah, that would be it for me.
Great advice. Thank you very much. Thank you. I think we've just got one more slide to finish up with. So thank you so much, guys. Really, really great insights. Thank you very much. So before we go today, please keep an eye on your inbox for a link to download the final GTS report, Decoding Global Reskilling and Career Paths. If you can't wait for that email, the links to download all of the GTS reports are in the series or in the chat box on this webinar. Make sure to get in touch with your local team if you're hiring internationally, or click in the link in the follow-up email. And as a final word from me today, I would like to say a huge thank you to our panelists and audience members for being here today. I would also like to thank Nick and all of the team at BCG and all of the network team and our partners for making the survey possible. And of course, a huge thank you to Totaljobs for hosting today. Have a great end to your week, and thank you very much, and goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.